to Through the Bible. Today we will begin our next book, First Chronicles, after First and Second Kings in the Bible. King David, First Chronicles, chapters 1 to 15. The books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles tell the history of Israel differently from the books of Samuel and Kings. The writer encourages the Jews who return from exile in Babylon. He explains why they have had all their troubles and how they can live right to become better in the future. The book of Chronicles begins with lists and genealogies of God's people. We then see the history of Saul's death and David's rise to power as king. It tells of David's military victories, the establishment of his throne in Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant's return to Jerusalem. It ends with David preparing the people to build the temple, his death, and the crowning of Solomon as king. King Saul, the first king of God's people, Israel, died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. After the death of King Saul and Jonathan in battle, David was first anointed king of Judah, then king of all the tribes of Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king. For the first 7.5 years of his reign, David ruled from Hebron. David then decided to take Jebus, later called Jerusalem, which was held by the Jebusites, as the new capital of his kingdom. Jerusalem on Mount Zion had a fortress that was so well defended the Jebusites boasted, "You will not get in here, even the blind and the lame can ward you off." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion and made Jerusalem the city of David. He started developing the land around the fortress, and the Lord was with him in all he did. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent envoys to David along with cedar logs and carpenters and stone masons, and they built a palace for David. David knew that God had established his kingdom, and he wanted to make Jerusalem a place of worship too. The Ark of the Covenant had been at the house of Abinadab at Kiriath Jearim, also called as Baalah, for the last 92 years. David wanted to bring it to Jerusalem and put it in a new tabernacle he had erected. The whole of Israel assembled at Kiriath Jearim, and the ark of God was put on a new cart with Uzzah and Ahio guiding it. They did not think it was important to obey God's instruction that the ark was only to be moved by the Levites. David and all the Israelites were celebrating with all their might before God, with songs and with harps, lyres, tambourines, cymbals, and trumpets. When they came to the threshing floor of Kidon, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he had put his hand on the ark. He died on the spot. David was afraid and asked, "How can I ever bring the ark of God to me?" The ark was taken to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite, where it stayed for the next 3 months. While the ark was at his house, the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his family. David decided to bring the ark to Jerusalem, but do it the way God had instructed Moses. It should be moved. "No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God," David announced. The Lord chose them to carry the ark and minister before him. When the Levites had carried the ark for 6 steps, David made sacrifices to God. David asked the Levites to choose musicians to make a joyful sound with lyres, harps, and cymbals. The musicians were led by Heman, Asaph, and Ethan. The Levites were clothed in fine white linen, as was David. Kenaiah was in charge of the choir, who led the singing. The people of Israel brought the ark to Jerusalem with shouts of joy and the sound of ram's horns, trumpets, cymbals, lyres, and harps. As the ark of the covenant was entering Jerusalem, David's wife Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. When she saw King David dancing and celebrating, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark and set it inside the tent that David had pitched for it. David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings and blessed everyone in the name of the Lord. He gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the crowd. Then everyone returned home. When David went home to his wife Michal, she said, "Is it right for the king of Israel to behave as any vulgar person would, in full view of the slave girls and servants?" David replied, "I was before the Lord who chose me to rule Israel, and I will celebrate before him."